I know what you're thinking. Why the bloody hell are you reviewing that? And even if that isn't what you're thinking, I'm going to tell you anyway, and it's down to my hideously late review 2 weeks ago. When I came back from Icon needing to finish my Broken Blade review, I did a lot of sleeping, then basically ended up saying to Bizarre Jelly 5, I guarantee you I'll have that video up by midday on Wednesday, or you can tell me to review anything ever and I'll do it, no questions asked. And well, as you're surely aware, that is not when I had my video up, and thus this. So hello, welcome back, and I present to you a review of Utano Prince-sama Maji Love 1000, a 13-episode shoujo reverse harem based on the visual novel series by Broccoli. It aired during the summer season of 2011, was produced by the studio A1 Pictures, written by Tomoro Kamparu and directed by Yuko. Now, my prior experiences with reverse harems and shows about idols in general hadn't really left me all that thrilled with the prospect of checking this one out. I've had some good experiences with idols in the past, but the most recent one I'd seen had me wanting to strangle pretty much every character with a speaking role. And having not seen all I've had almost no experience in the reverse harem genre, and the only show I have seen involved a bunch of guys who dressed up as chess sets wrapped in belts, and it was horrible. So I think it's fairly safe to say I wasn't expecting much, but I'm not one to judge a show before I watch it, and well, these days I find synchronized dancing to be one of the best things about music. There is a young girl who goes by the name of Haruka Nanami, and she has the most terrifying, piercing, orange and green eyes the world has ever seen. She has some lofty dreams to become a composer and write music for the Bishonen idol she spends her life swooning over. Thus she enters Saotome Academy, which is an idol school that teaches pretty boys how to be idols and pretty girls how to make music for said idols or simply gawk and dribble over them. Upon entering the academy, she meets no less than 6 beautiful gentlemen of various shapes and sizes, but much to their dismay, the academy has but one ironclad rule: no love allowed! Now is that, or is that not, the most subtle harem trope enabling plot device you ever did hear? The series then revolves around making and singing some songs, and eventually Haruka is meant to choose which one of these lovely slices of fruitcake she wishes to write songs for. It is all but guaranteed to make your kokoro go doki doki. It was an exceptionally simple story, and the hideously obvious plot points they threw in allowed it to get straight to the point and ignore a lot of that stupid gumph harem shows are so commonly soaked in. Explicitly saying no love allowed and then you have to choose one of these guys to write a song for is absolutely bad and uninspired writing in its most blatant form, but it worked. Having these ironclad story foci thrown at you so early on pretty much meant the series could get down to what it needed to, you know, watching delicious young men with flamboyant hairdos and fashion senses dance around and play saxophones. And at this point I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy this. I'm gonna turn my brain off and drown in an ocean of manly moe and musical magic, and more than anything, not take it seriously. Ha! Gay! One thing that really struck me quite majorly with this series, that it didn't seem entirely focused around romance. You see, though Haruka was a complete knob magnet, she herself did not seem like a fiend of the D. The relationships between her and the Heartbreak Kids so often seem more rooted in friendship than in lustful manservice. And though the root of this certainly was that forceful plot point forbidding said romance, it ended up making this harem situation come across as though she was doing more than just swinging between willies like Tarzan. It did a lot to aid in creating a degree of legitimacy to this thing's story in the end, because when she spent time with each different Hairspray hero, you didn't feel like she was being unfaithful to the others. But of course the big problem with this style of story remains in that they weren't able to give each lusty lad an equal amount of time in the spotlight, and at all times when one of them was getting their episode of development, the others were so often left completely in the dark. So this is going to be a problem like with any harem involving a fairly large cast, in that if you like or dislike a single character more than the others, it will lead you to have issues with certain parts of the series. But in the end, I did find this series to be far more enjoyable than I initially expected to. It had its problems, like the aforementioned poorly written plot points, some similar episode structures, and there was some exceptionally superficial drama in places. But overall, these issues can be easily brushed off when you're just sitting there to enjoy the show for what it is. This is not a marvel of writing, this is not a quote-unquote good show, but it was legitimately hilarious in places, had some heartwarming moments, and honestly the best ending I could have hoped for. Everything was rounded off and tied up, there was room for more to follow, but the story at hand was concluded in a really satisfying way. And the cast we spent time with throughout the story were again not the most well-written or original bunch of boy toys in the industry, but they did exactly what they needed to. But before we get onto them, I wish to first and foremost mention that the principal of the school was voiced by Norio Wakamoto, and thus was amazing in every way, shape, form, fashion and feeling. He was hilarious, he was this oddball, crazy eccentric, and one who could only exist as he does through the pipes of Wakamoto. I love that guy! Ha! Gay! But most of the other side, or more specifically background characters, seemed as though they were designed to be not much more than gormless and stupid vegetables. And all they really did was flock around the dreamy dudes like sheep or act all spiteful and bitchy to make Haruka seem like more of an angel. And with that, she did end up coming across as though she was legitimately the only girl in the school with anything more than cotton wool between her ears, thus making it actually believable that she's the one all the sausage soldiers were drawn to. But honestly, if you've seen a modern shoujo before, you can probably already guess what kind of a character she is. And I won't knock it, as the quiet, nervous, kind and clumsy innocence of characters like her generally seem to work work in this role. If she was too independent or outgoing, then the show would lose a lot of what it's trying to be, and let's face it, this isn't even remotely the kind of show where a shoujo heroine on the level of Utena or Oscar is going to be able to shine. She did everything she needed to, had enough of a mind of her own to be able to make story progressing decisions, but was docile and impressionable enough to get caught up in this spider web of tempting testosterone. And as far as the sensual Simons themselves go, they are quite the interesting bunch, but the biggest problem for me was that a couple of them felt way too similar to one another at the start, and this kind of led me to feel they just wanted to have 6 harem members because they liked that number and not because they legitimately had enough ideas to fill the roles. And though the others had similarities in places, I felt the clearest defenders of this were Tokiwa Ichinose and Masato Hirajikawa. These two were both super serious, super calm, cool, intelligent, and seemingly emotionless individuals. And it was good that they later branched off and got some peppered development here and there to show you that they were actually different characters. Because early on, the only real difference between them seemed to be that Tokiwa was absolutely fabulous, and Masato appeared as though he'd been attempting to cut his own hair after downing a pint of fairy liquid. The other two I felt were a bit too similar at times, had enough differences in the end for me to not really be bothered by it, and they were Otoyo Itoki and Sho Kurusu. These two were both very young at heart and childlike, then Itoki ended up being far more cheerful and relaxed, whereas Kurusu had a major case of little person syndrome, making him fairly high-strung and irritable. And next up is Ren Jinguji, and he is one of those characters any shoujo involving chastity-challenging chaps will always include in its roster. He's the womanizer, the fountain of confidence with limitless arrogance and self-esteem, and I thought he was brilliant. And you know why I thought he was brilliant? Because he was essentially the exact same character as Toga from Utena, and generally I like characters that are like characters from Utena, even if they are much worse comparatively. And rounding off the group is a chap who in a way almost felt somewhat original, and I can't really point fingers as to what character he reminds me of. So, Natsuki Shinomiya wears glasses, which is something I felt this show absolutely needs more of, and he's a nonchalant, relaxed, and very feminine, almost motherly character in a way. He was lovely, but there's also a polar opposite side shown to his character at one stage too that made him pretty interesting. But when we look back on the rest of this troupe of cutie pies, the biggest thing that struck me is that they're all pretty generic and cliched, and we have absolutely seen their roles performed many a time before. However, in this situation, I don't feel as though this is really a negative point, because you see, this is a show with 7 main characters. That is a lot of main characters for a series that is merely 13 episodes long, and if they were all to be completely new and original individuals, I feel like the series would have completely and utterly failed to do anything. Using these archetypes we have seen before allows for the characters to already be fully fleshed out and developed before you even watch the first episode. You can already understand their mindsets, and thus the issue of each of them not getting enough screen time was almost non-existent. Sadly, this is a positive result of lazy writing and means the show will never top any best of lists, but in the confines of what it was, I was happy with what this series brought to the table. Even if one of them did look like he'd had his hair styled in a magnitude 9 earthquake. The rest of the lady killers did look pretty swanky though, and disregarding Haruka's terrifying orange and green eyes of satanic punishment, the designs as a whole were rather pleasing. I mean, like, the entire show had this major emphasis on ridiculously coloured everything, so the viewing experience was almost like watching a 5-hour Skittles advert. And the animation quality was pretty much as it needed to be. There was no disgusting CGI dancing like that other idol-based series that I want to disappear from this plane of existence. It was a very clean show in terms of its visuals. It used a lot of subtle techniques to make up for the lack of detail in certain design aspects, so it didn't look amazing, but in the same vein, because of this, looked just as good as it could possibly need to. And because this is a show about idols with songwriting as a huge theme, the music was of course a major part of what made this show enjoyable, and it really did like to break into song a lot. Like, it was almost like I was watching a musical at times when it would just erupt into a montage sing-song at least once an episode. And the funniest thing about this was that when it broke into these songs, it would just be one delicious dude singing on his own, perhaps with an acoustic guitar or something, and then out of nowhere an entire band would start playing. I was just like, who the hell is playing those other instruments? This makes no fucking sense at all. But then he'd like put the guitar down and keep singing, but the guitar would still be playing. It was brilliant. And the lyrics had just enough English to keep me smiling from ear to ear, no matter what else was going on in the song. Are you ready? So red song. Then in terms of the actual quality of this music, all I can say is that I found it to be honestly quite legit, and that it really did sound like it was written by a 15-year-old girl. Now, I don't mean that as some kind of an insult, because I feel like the songs got better as the series went on and as her writing talent grew, and they weren't bad, but they did not feel like the music of a professional, which I think absolutely worked in the show's favour. I'm not sure if that was their intention, but that's how it came across, and I was glad it did because it made it all believable, somewhat. And I've already mentioned the voice acting in passing, and to be honest, any series involving Wakamoto is going to get a thumbs up from me no matter what the rest of it sounds like. The other performances were more than adequate. I don't have much to say about it. Beyond Wakamoto, nobody else really jumped out as being all that impressive, but it was great. It was everything it needed to be. All the actors perfectly delivered the voices that need to be assigned to the archetypes of the characters they were portraying. And with that, I have just spent way too long talking about this show. I thought this was going to be one of those reviews that's over in like 6 minutes or something, but no, there was a surprising amount to say about this thing. As I've already said, I don't deem this to be a good show, but I still found it thoroughly entertaining, was glad I watched it, and could totally see myself checking out the second season sometime. It was fun, and if you at all like the sound of it and have a thing for effeminate Casanovas, then I see no reason whatsoever for you to not get a kick out of this series. And thus I shall be singing a sensational 60% rating on Utano Prince-sama, and will take great pride in doing so. If you do wish to check this thing out, then all you need to do is take the escalator down to the link in the description and check it out on Crunchyroll. So, have you seen this show? If so, what did you think of it? And as always, feel free to drop me a recommendation of what you want me to review next. Yeah, I actually enjoyed that. See you next week.
Gay!
I managed to come up with more than 20 different ways to say pretty boy in that review, and I'm really proud of myself. So, which one was your favourite? And do you have any others that you want to add to that? And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go and learn how to dance.